at Filmjet are back with another one. I'm doing this episode a little later than I wanted to because it took me a long time to get through some of the other things I wanted to do. But now we're here and I'm going to talk about 2022 and what I'm excited to watch and do in 2023. I didn't really watch a lot of the mainstream movies and stuff like that in 2022. So I'm just gonna go through what I watched by month and say what I like, what I didn't like, and again talk about what I'm anticipating for 2023. So I'm just gonna get right into it. January was a pretty good month to me, at least for what I watched personally. Actually on January 1st, the first movie of the year that I watched was No Country for Old Men, and I had never seen that before, so that was a banger to me. I don't think I really have to get into why that movie is so good, but if anybody knows anything about movies, they've probably heard about No Country for Old Men. It's something that people are constantly talking about to this day, and I really liked it a lot. It's one of those movies that you can probably get a different meaning out of every time you watch it, so I definitely will be rewatching that in the future. And I also watched this anime movie from the 90s called Ninja Scroll. And what was interesting about this one was I read that it was one of the inspirations for The Matrix, which had came out less than a decade later. And if you watch this and watch The Matrix, you can see that a little bit with the visual style. And Ninja Scroll has a great visual style, great animation, great character designs. It was just amazing. Now, something I didn't really like was Hawkeye. I think it came out in 2021, but since the episodes came out once a week, it leaked into 2022. So I finished it in 2022. And this was one of the things that really made me feel jaded towards the MCU. I really did not like this show at all. I thought it was bland. I thought it was pretty boring. I just didn't really care for anything that was going on. So that was not very fun to watch. And I think that was the first step of me not really watching every single MCU project that comes out because I've been a fan of the MCU. I mean, I grew up loving all the Marvel characters, so when they started doing all these movies, of course I was excited about them. And I remember going to see Iron Man in the theater back in 2008. But when you're releasing this much volume and everything isn't at a certain level of quality, it's just not really worth it. There's so much good things that are coming out nowadays between movies and TV shows that I can't watch every single MCU thing. It just doesn't make any sense when there's plenty of other great shows like I'm going to mention in this podcast that I could be watching instead. So yeah, Hawkeye was not very great. And for the rest of January, I watched Memento, Vinland Saga, Super Crooks, and Eternals. Now, Memento is one of Christopher Nolan's earliest movies. I think it's his first movie, if I remember correctly. Let me look. I got my letterboxd up that I'm looking through right now. So, well, it is his second movie, I think. I think Following counts as his first one, but either way, it was really early in his career, and I liked it when I first saw it, but I wasn't really amazed by it like how everybody makes it seem. But as I thought about it more and more, and I really realized what was going on in the movie, that movie is amazing. Especially for somebody that was as young as Christopher Nolan was at the time. To make a movie like that, and you aren't even 5, 10 movies into your career, is just crazy. So, yeah, Memento, if you haven't seen that, you need to go see it. And Vinland Saga, oh my goodness. This is definitely one of my favorite anime right now. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but season 2 is finally running at the moment. So, every week I'm watching that when an episode drops. Vinland Saga was just crazy. The action was insane, animation, insane. It had great characters. This is one of the recent shows that I think I binged. I watched it all pretty quick because every episode was just amazing and I wanted to see what happened next so bad. So yeah, Vinland Saga is definitely a recommendation for me. If you like anime action, you can't go wrong with Vinland Saga. And Super Crooks, was another good one. Another anime that released on Netflix. It's based on the comic book universe by Mark Miller, I think. I think that's his name. But it's about these people that are superpowered and they are villains, if you couldn't tell by the title. Well, they're crooks, so they commit crimes, they rob people and stuff like that. And this was another one that I really liked. I really liked the art style. And it's definitely a short and sweet one. And Eternals. This was another one that made me feel even more jaded towards the MCU because this movie was so long, boring, dead. I think I talked about it on the podcast before already, so I'm not going to talk about it for too long. But I actually fell asleep watching this, and I never fall asleep watching movies, so that should tell you how boring this movie was. Now moving on to February, I watched the movie Nobody, which had came out in 2021, starring Bob Odenkirk, which you might know from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. That was a solid action movie. After that, I watched Blade Runner 2049, and this is one that I didn't really understand all the hype for. I'm a huge fan of the original Blade Runner, so of course I was worried when they were doing another Blade Runner because, in my opinion, they didn't need to make a sequel. Blade Runner is fine as it is, and it's sad because I think that Denis Villeneuve is a great director, but this movie just didn't really do it for me. I don't think it's bad in any way, but it just wasn't as great as everybody else was making it out to be. Everybody talked about the visuals and this and that, which it does look good visually, but it was just kind of weird. Like, it was like they were trying to hit every color of the rainbow before the movie ended. There wasn't really any cohesiveness or anything that was trying to stick to a certain style. It just felt like there was a scene and this room was red, and then in the next scene it would be a yellow room, and then it would be a blue place, and then a gray place, and then a black place, and then a purple place. It was just very weird. And while in a vacuum, each one of those scenes looks amazing, but as it flowed together for an entire movie, I just wasn't really feeling it. And then the story didn't really do anything for me either. So Blade Runner 2049, I say definitely watch, but I personally didn't really like it that much. And then next, after that, I watched one of my favorite animated movies of recent years now. This one didn't get enough attention, in my opinion. It should have won all the awards, but we know how that goes. Anything that's not Disney doesn't really win any awards. And this movie is Wolf Walkers, made by an Irish studio, and they're called Cartoon Saloon, and a lot of their movies are based on like Irish folk tales and stuff like that. And I saw their other movie, Secret of Kells, not long before this, and I was really excited to see Wolf Walkers, and Wolf Walkers was amazing. So I urge anybody that hears this to please watch Wolf Walkers. If you like animation, great story, great characters, Wolf Walkers is pretty amazing. Now, something that I didn't like in the month of February was an anime called FLCL or Fooly Cooly, which is very highly acclaimed. I wanted to watch it for a long time because I saw pictures and I thought it looked cool, but when I watched it, it was probably one of the worst things I've ever seen. And I know if anybody hears this that's a fan of FLCL, they're going to be mad because it seems like every single person really thinks that this is one of the greatest anime ever, and I just didn't get it at all. And a lot of people were saying maybe it's because of the time that I watched it and that I'm grown and I should have watched it when I was a kid and maybe I would have got it, but I don't know, man. I think that if something is good, it's good no matter what age or when somebody watches it. The best movies and stuff stand the test of time. Some of my favorite movies are from 40, 50, 60 years ago. It doesn't matter when it came out. If it's good, it's good. But I think that FLCL is trash. Sorry. And another movie I watched in February is 1996's Fargo. And that was another good one. I wanted to see more from the Coen brothers, and I've heard a lot about Fargo, and I know that the recent TV show is based on this, and I think Fargo is a great movie, and I'm excited to watch the TV show. And after that, I watched Heavy Metal 1980 from 1981, which is an animated anthology movie. And I could talk a lot about heavy metal. It's kind of a mixed bag to me because there's a lot of great visuals and a great soundtrack, but a lot of the stories aren't really that great. But it's one of those things that I think everybody needs to watch either way because there's some iconic moments in there. And last year, I finally watched Terminator and Terminator 2. I remember seeing a clip of Terminator when I was really young, when the Terminator goes to the police station and says, I'll be back, and then drives through the front door with a car. And it took me probably about 15 years to see the full movie after that. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, Terminator is really good. That movie is so special to me. I wish I would have saw it earlier, but if I was younger, I might not have had the appreciation for it because now I understand what it takes to make a movie and I know what people put into it. And I think it's better that I saw it as an adult. And I'll get into Terminator 2 a little later, but I think Terminator 1 is just as good. A lot of people say Terminator 2 is because a lot of people say Terminator 2 is better because it's big and grand and everything like that, but I enjoy the first Terminator just as much. There's some great moments in that movie. And then the last thing I watched in February was The French Dispatch, directed by Wes Anderson. I'm a pretty big fan of his movies. I think. Well, I'm a fan of his movies and his style. But The French Dispatch was good, but not great. Pretty solid. I think if you're a fan of him, you'll like it. And if you're not a fan of Wes Anderson, you probably won't like it. But I'll watch anything he puts out just for his style. And in March, I got back into some DC stuff. I've been so behind on the DC animated movies. I need to get back into it. And in March of last year, I watched Justice Society World War II. I think that's the last DC animated movie I watched, so it's almost a year. It's about to be February right now, so I need to get back on these DC animated movies. I'm usually pretty up on them. Like when they release, I watch them pretty quick, but I don't know, man. I've been watching a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, I watched Justice Society World War II. I kind of like this new universe that they're doing ever since they ended that universe that was based on the New 52, starting with Flashpoint and ending with Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. So I like this new universe. A lot of people didn't like the new art style from Superman Man of Tomorrow and Justice League World War II, but I do. I like it. And also Batman Along Halloween. But again, I like the art style. I think these movies are pretty solid. And I'm just excited for more stuff to come out. And probably the biggest thing that I watched in February was The Batman. Speaking of DC, the 3 hour movie directed by Matt Reeves, starring Robert Pattinson. Man, is this the best Batman movie? I think it's top two. I mean, it's only natural to mention The Dark Knight. That seems to be everybody's favorite. It was probably my favorite before either that or Mask of the Phantasm. But people never bring up the animated movies whenever they have these conversations. I think Mask of the Phantasm is just as good as anything. But again, the Batman, great. I don't think I had to talk about that for too long. And I mentioned Blade Runner before, and I finally watched the short Blade Runner Blackout 2022. It's just a little short film. Um, the animation is really good. I like the style. If you're a fan of Blade Runner, then watch it. And this next one is really obscure. Six or 7 minute short film called The Captive, directed by Rene Laloux and Felipe Caza or Philippe. I don't know how you pronounce it, but the reason why I watched this is because Rene Laloux is probably one of my favorite directors. He might be my favorite director. I'm a huge fan of him and all the art styles in his movies. He tends to work with an artist that really gets to do his thing in the movie, and this is one of those things, and this is one of those instances. Philippe Caza is an artist who I've come to be a fan of. I've seen a lot of his art on the internet recently, and he's really good. So to see him get to do an animation, a short animated film with Rene Laloux is pretty cool. If you don't know who Rene Laloux is, he directed Fantastic Planet, Time Masters, and Gandahar, and he did a bunch of other short films. And I'm a fan of all three of those movies. They're some of my favorite movies, and they're really obscure and hard to find besides Fantastic Planet. So I always talk about them any chance I could. And they were really hard for me to find. I had to go on a whole bunch of different websites, and then half the time you try to watch it and it's not in good quality and things like that because it's just not readily available. But if you have HBO Max, you need to go watch Fantastic Planet right now, or if you or you can buy it on Criterion. So that makes it pretty easy. So one of Rene Laloux's movies is pretty easy to find, but all his other stuff is really hard to find, but it's definitely worth it. And then I watched Batman Year One and its companion short film, the DC Showcase Catwoman. These are really good. I really like the style. And Batman Year One is interesting to me because it's almost as much about Commissioner Gordon as it is about Batman. And again, good style, good animation, and it's a really short movie too. So I like to rewatch it a lot. I think that was like my third time watching it. And then I watched a movie from one of my favorite directors, Akira Kurosawa, The Hidden Fortress. That movie was pretty interesting, and you can see where the Star Wars influence is. And speaking of Kurosawa, after that, I watched A Fistful of Dollars, which is the legendary spaghetti western with Clint Eastwood, but it's an unlicensed remake of Yojimbo. And if you see Yojimbo and then watch A Fistful of Dollars, you'll see that it's pretty clear. So to me, that kind of makes me lose a little respect for it because the whole plot is just taken from Yojimbo, and Yojimbo is better anyway. But a lot of American people probably won't want to watch Yojimbo because it's in Japanese, even though a spaghetti western just has half the people dubbed over in English anyway. But I don't know. A Fistful of Dollars is good, but Yojimbo is better. There's a reason why they copied it. And March was a pretty great month, man. After that, I watched this animated anthology movie called The House, which came out in 2022. And this was a stop motion animated movie with three stories that were all pretty good in their own way. And some of them were actually pretty scary too. So definitely watch The House. It's on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, go watch that. And then after that, I watched another Western and a great movie directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, There Will Be Blood. This is another one. Came out the same year as No Country for Old Men, so that's pretty crazy that in 2007 we got both of these movies. And again, if you know anything about movies, you probably heard enough about this movie already, but if you haven't seen it, go watch it. And then I rewatched 300, probably my favorite movie from Zack Snyder. I think it's his best movie too, and I like Watchmen. I haven't seen Dawn of the Dead, but other than that, I think 300 is his best movie. And this is another one I shouldn't have to talk about that much. The action, the visual style. It really does look like a comic book come to life, and I wish that more movies would stylize themselves like this. I think a lot of times people get too caught up in trying to look realistic, but you don't have to look realistic, especially when you're trying to adapt a comic book. Make it look fun. That should be the most important thing, is having fun. And it should be fun to watch. And 300 was fun to watch. And this next one is another pretty good movie called Fire and Ice, directed by Ralph Bakshi. He's another director I've been getting into recently. He's known for using a technique called rotoscope, which is where you film a real person and then use their movements to draw over them. So you get this really nice, smooth, realistic looking style of animation. And I think it's pretty cool. I think there's a place for it in animation, and I don't know why people don't do stuff like this anymore. It seems like I can't think of another. I can't think of a recent movie that has rotoscoping in it. But yeah, Fire and Ice is pretty good. Standard fantasy stuff, Save the Princess, that whole deal. But the unique visual style makes up for it. So again, Fire and Ice, you should watch it. And this next one is a Korean movie called The Handmaiden. That one was really good. And I ended March with two bangers. The first one is Flea, which is another great animated movie, and I don't think it got enough attention. Foreign and animated movies don't get enough attention in America, and this one is both. So you know that almost nobody in America watched it, but everybody that did watch it was raving about it, so I checked it out, and the hype is real. And this is another one that had a more realistic style, but I think it really works here. I really enjoyed Flea a lot, and it had a very compelling story. So yeah, go ahead and watch Flea. And I ended March with another one of my favorite anime right now, Jujutsu Kaisen. I think I also binged this one pretty quick. This is what I imagine all shonen should be like, honestly. You've got great characters, it's got a cool concept with how the people have powers and the curses and things like that. And you can just tell it's building towards something big. This is another one I shouldn't have to talk about too much. If you've heard anything about anime in the past year or two, you know everybody's watching Jujutsu Kaisen. This is one of the heavy hitters right now, one of the most popular anime, and it's for a reason because it is really good. Now, April. First thing I watched in April was 1979's Stalker. The reason why I watched Stalker is because I've heard about Tarkovsky a lot in his movies. I think this is the first movie of his that I watched because I also watched Solaris. But the reason why I heard about him and Stalker is because it's based off this book called Roadside Picnic. And last year, or maybe it was 2021, I played through the series of video games called Metro 2033, Metro Last Light, and Metro Exodus. And they're also based on the same book called Roadside Picnic, even though it's very loosely, both of these things are not really taking much from the book besides the term stalker and then like a place where weird stuff happens. So from playing the game and figuring out the origins of those games and seeing that there's also this movie based on the same thing, it made me just want to watch it. And I always like things that have maybe radiation affected areas that have weird phenomena going on and stuff like that. So Stalker was a pretty attractive concept to me, and it really delivered. It's a very slow burn type of movie, but a lot of old movies are like that anyway. They're not like now where a lot of blockbusters are kind of like always shoving things in your face and having all these bright colors and big set pieces, but not really having a lot of substance. But this movie has a lot of substance. It has a lot to say. It has a great visual style, great writing, great acting, and I think this is what got me into watching Russian movies too, because I've seen a few more Russian movies after this, and I'm gonna watch a whole lot more. So yeah, Stalker is definitely one of my favorite things that I've watched recently. And then I watched another short film directed by Rene Laloux called The Snails. I think it's on YouTube. It was also done in paper cutout, just like Fantastic Planet. So that was pretty interesting. And this next one is an animated movie that I think everybody needs to see. You almost never see people talking about it because it's pretty obscure and it's Hungarian. So usually when people are watching foreign movies, they're from Japan or Korea or maybe France or even the UK. But this one is from Hungary. So it's kind of under the radar from the beginning. But when I tell you this movie's visual style is so good, This is some of the best traditional 2D animation I've ever seen. So anybody hearing this needs to go watch Son of the White Mare. And then after that, I watched one of my favorite animated movies, and I just mentioned it a few minutes ago, called Time Masters, directed by Rene Laloux. This is what I imagine sci-fi to be like. Spaceships, gunfights, weird planets with weird plants and weird aliens on them. It's just everything you could want out of a sci-fi story with a great visual style by one of my favorite artists of all time, Mobius. See, Rene Laloux in another movie, like I mentioned, worked with Philippe Caza, who's a great artist. And in this movie, he had Mobius do the art direction. If you don't know who Mobius is, his real name is Jean Girard, and he's one of the greatest illustrators I've ever seen. And this movie is so good looking. This is another one that I can rewatch over and over again. And this next movie I watched is an anthology movie from Japan directed by Kobayashi. This is another director I've been meaning to watch. It is 3 hours long, but it is worth it because this is another one. It looks great. It has some really cool sets, and it is Kwaidan or Quaidan. I don't know how to pronounce it, but Kwaidan. I think it's still on HBO Max. So if you ever want to sit down for about 3 hours and be amazed, this is what you need to do. And then I also rewatched Fantastic Planet, which I mentioned a little bit before. I think I should do an entire episode on this movie, so I'm not going to talk about it much anymore, but you need to go watch it. And then I rewatched The Batman because I think this is about when it first went on HBO Max, so I wanted to watch it again. And then after this, I watched a movie that I feel is pretty underrated. When people are talking about Studio Ghibli movies, they never seem to talk about this, and that is Porco Rosso. I've seen a few Ghibli movies, and I think this is my favorite. I've seen Ponyo, I've seen Princess Mononoke, I've seen Spirited Away, and I think this is the last one that I've seen. And it might be my favorite. I'm looking at all the Ghibli movies to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And yeah, that is all that I've seen. I will watch them all eventually, but out of the ones that I've seen, this is my favorite. A lot of people talk about Kiki's Delivery Service, of course, Princess Mononoke, Ponyo, Howl's Moving Castle, and Spirited Away, but nobody ever talks about Porco Rosso. And I think this movie is so amazing. It just gave me this feeling of being happy and sad at the same time. It's really hard to explain the feeling that this movie gave me after I watched it. But it's another one that I think I'm gonna rewatch pretty soon. And yeah, I think it's really my favorite Ghibli movie. And now this last movie of April that I watched is already one of my favorite movies of all time. And that is 2011's The Raid, directed by Gareth Evans. Now, let me tell you something. This movie's action is so insane. It's like nonstop from beginning to end. Some of the best hand to hand combat that I've ever seen in a movie. And this is what I'm talking about. A lot of people might not understand why I'm so jaded towards the MCU and other popular franchises and blockbusters because when people are putting out action like this is what I'd rather be watching with smaller budgets. This movie's budget was only $1 million, and it has better action than pretty much every Marvel movie, and those have budgets of $200 million. Come on, man. And those are movies where I expect crazy action because we're dealing with a lot of people that have superpowers, and I grew up watching the cartoons. And when you have movies with basically unlimited budgets, there's no excuse to have lackluster action. And this movie, The Raid, had $1 million and they use it to their fullest. This movie is so amazing, and I can rewatch it all the time. And speaking of MCU, in May, I watched Moon Knight. This was a show that I was very excited about, and I don't think it really delivered. Moon Knight is a character that I've been wanting to see for a very long time. I remember discovering him over a decade ago because I don't really read comics that much, so whenever there's new characters introduced or things like that or books coming out, and I don't even think Moon Knight's a very new character, but anyway, I don't really know the more obscure characters unless I really look for them. So at the time, I had just discovered Moon Knight. Maybe this was around 2010. And I was like, wow, this guy seems pretty cool. Like, I read his Wikipedia. He has a cool costume. I would like to see him in a movie or a show or something. And he appeared in a few cartoons, but none of those cartoons are very good. I think like Avengers Assemble and Ultimate Spider-Man, but those cartoons aren't that good. So I never saw him in animation. And when the show came out, I was just kind of like, okay. I mean, it's not really bad. It's not bad, not even close to being Hawkeye bad. But if you're saying, should I watch Moon Knight or The Bear? Watch The Bear. That's the point that I'm making. There's so many better TV shows coming out. It seems like there's a great TV show coming out every week nowadays. So when there's mediocre stuff like this, it just makes me not want to watch it at all, as much as I love Marvel. And then after that, speaking of good shows, I watched season 2 of one of my favorite anime, and that is Megalobox. This is another one that I don't think gets enough attention. I rarely see people talk about it in the anime community. It seems like people are always talking about other things like My Hero Academia or Naruto or whatever, but Megalobox is one of my favorite anime. And season 1, while it was good, I don't really have any problem with it. Season 2 took it to a whole nother level. This is another show that I should do a whole podcast about, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But again, if you haven't seen Megalobox, watch it. It's another one that's short. I think it's 24 episodes in all, and it is very well worth it. It's about this world where people box with what they call gear. So instead of just normal boxing, they wear these contraptions on their arms that make them punch harder. And we follow a character that tries to make it to the top of that world. And it's just really good. I don't want to give away anything, so just go watch it. And speaking of the MCU again, I watched Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I'm not really going to talk about this movie, but it was okay. I think this is the common theme with the Marvel stuff. It's just okay. It's not really bad. It's not really good. I was a little disappointed because of the hype leading up to it. And it wasn't even about the cameos for me. I could care less about all these cameos. Everybody thought that every single Marvel character was going to be in this movie. It was so funny. I'm hearing things about Magneto and Wolverine and, whatever, Superior Iron Man and this and that. It's just like, okay, guys. I think people were even saying Mephisto was going to be in it. I don't know what this obsession with Mephisto is and all the Marvel stuff. I guess people are saying Mephisto until it happens so they can just be right that one time. But Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was kind of a disappointment. Everybody was happy because Sam Raimi is directing it, and he's a good director. But to me, when it comes to Marvel, it doesn't matter who the director is because they can never put their style in it. And that was the same thing here. If I watch this movie, there's no way I could tell who directed it. If I watch a Christopher Nolan movie, you can tell it's a Christopher Nolan movie. If I watch a Quentin Tarantino movie, you can tell that it's Quentin Tarantino because these directors have distinct styles. But Marvel just doesn't let people do that. And I mentioned Ralph Bakshi before, and I watched his movie Fritz the Cat. I don't really want to talk about this movie because there's some controversial stuff in it, but it was okay. I think I like the animation in Fire and Ice better, but This movie was okay, I guess. If you're a completionist, I say to watch it, but if you're not really into animation or you don't really care about Ralph Bakshi, then I guess you shouldn't watch it. But it was okay, I guess. And this next one is another underrated piece of animation, at least to me. Well, maybe not underrated because it seemed like everybody that watched it liked it, but underwatched. And this is Maya and the Three. And this is a show based on Mayan folk tales or Mayan mythology, something like that. Either way, it's a great show with great animation, and this is 3D animated, and it's on Netflix. So if you haven't seen Maya and the Three, go watch it. And I mentioned Terminator 1 before, and in May I watched Terminator 2. This movie is so insane. And, again, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Terminator 2 because pretty much everybody has seen it by now. I'm probably the last person on earth that's seen it, but Terminator 2 blew me away. It's just great when a sequel can be as good or surpass the first. So, yeah, Terminator 2, pretty amazing. And the last thing I saw in May was an anime movie called Night is Short, Walk On Girl. This movie has such a great visual style in a very unique style, and it says a lot of things. And it was also pretty funny, and it's also related to the anime, the Tatsumi Galaxy. I think that's what it's called. So I'm gonna watch that eventually. But again, Night is Short, Walk on Girl, great anime movie. So if you like anime and romance and that kind of thing, you'll love this. And now we're on to June. So the first thing I watched in June was Raging Bull, directed by Martin Scorsese. He's a director who I'm gonna watch all his movies eventually, but I've seen Goodfellas. Raging Bull might be the second movie I saw by him actually. No, I actually saw Taxi Driver probably about 2 years ago. So at this point, I've seen Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, and Wolf of Wall Street, and eventually I'm gonna see all his other stuff. But Raging Bull is probably my favorite so far. I love the black and white look. I think this story of this boxer and his life was really good. And who doesn't like Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci? And Joe Pesci always steals the show and everything he's in. He's always super memorable. And it was the same thing in this movie. Raging Bull is probably my favorite Scorsese movie, like I said. And there's just something about boxers or fighters whenever they're going through something. It seems like it's worse than what normal people go through for some reason. So it makes for good movies. Maybe it's because they literally get beat up sometimes. But yeah, and since I'm talking more about films now, I will get into The Boys later, but I did watch The Boys Diabolical, which is the animated anthology. I don't know if it's really a show or a movie, but it's a collection of short films, and they were all pretty good. They all had their own animation styles, and I think it was a really nice companion piece to The Boys. It shows different parts of this world that we've seen where there are these people given compound V as babies, and we see the different effects of that from all sides. And I think The Boys Diabolical did a great job of that. Some of the episodes were funny, some were sad, some were a little bit in between. And, if you've seen The Boys, you need to watch Diabolical. And this next thing that I watched, this anime called Serial Experiments Lane, blew my mind. It's highly experimental. This is another one that I need to rewatch because sometimes I don't even know what I watched. It's one of those things where I had to read about it after it was done to make sure that I saw what I think I saw and things like that. And the fact that this came out in 1998 is crazy because it is extremely relevant for today's time. So once again, that Serial Experiments Lane, go watch it. And I mentioned Tarkovsky before, and in June I did watch Solaris. This is another movie about romance and sci-fi, and it's great. Another visually great movie.
And the thing about old movies is that they didn't really have CGI, so whatever they put on film had to be real, and they had to use what they had and build sets where they can and things like that. And Solaris is a great movie in that regard. So again, it is similar to how Stalker is in the way it's a slow burn. It's pretty long. I think it's over 2.5 hours, but it's definitely worth the watch. And then I watched the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. As a big Star Wars fan, I don't know if I was disappointed. I think there was some good moments, but I don't think that it really lived up to the potential. It's sad that with these characters that we all love, like Obi-Wan and Boba Fett, that they can't put everything into those shows because we've seen the potential. And I'm going to talk about Andor a little bit, even though I just did a whole series of episodes breaking Andor down fully. But I did watch Andor in 2022, so I'm going to mention it again. But that show is the best Star Wars show to me, besides maybe the Clone Wars. But I still might have to put Andor above the Clone Wars because the Clone Wars does have bad moments. It is a show that's 6 seasons long, and it's a show that it took a while for them to get their feet under them and really perfect the animation and the art style and things like that, and stop having episodes with Jar Jar being the main focus and things like that. So as much as I love the Clone Wars, I do have to acknowledge its flaws, and Andor doesn't really have any flaws. Talk about writing, talk about visuals, talk about soundtrack, characters, everything you want in a show. So to see Obi-Wan treated like this, it seemed like it was lackadaisical. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi we're talking about, a character from the original trilogy. And you mean to tell me that these people put more into Andor? Come on, Disney, you got to do better. Now, I'm glad that Disney makes any show that I could say is like a 9 or 10 out of 10, but come on, you can't mess up Obi-Wan. So while I don't think Obi-Wan is bad, it's not great either. But you know what is great? This movie that I watched after Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is a sequel to another one of my favorite movies, and that is The Raid 2. And I might have spoken about this before, but this is the only way I can compare it to the first one is like how people compare Terminator 2 to Terminator 1. Yes, both are great, but Terminator 2 is just way bigger. It's it's grand and it's insane. That's how the Raid 2 is compared to the Raid 1. You can tell they got more money and they did a lot more with it. The action somehow is crazier and everything in this movie is just insane. You see, the first movie was mostly in one location. The Raid 2 utilizes a lot of different locations and things like that. Because, like I said, they had more money, but they used it just like Terminator. They had to make Terminator 1 for cheap. Terminator 2, they got more money, and they just got insane. And the same thing happened with the Raid. The Raid 2 is just as good, if not better, than the Raid 1. And if you haven't seen these two movies, you need to go watch them. And this next movie is the first movie by Wong Kar-wai that I've seen. I did recently watch Chungking Express, and I'm gonna watch a bunch of his other stuff because I really do like his style. So yeah, I watched In the Mood for Love, and I was trying to watch a little more romance stuff. I try to branch out to different genres. I don't want to watch, my dark, gritty action stuff all the time. Sometimes you have to watch romance. I try to watch things from different countries at different times too. So again, I watched In the Mood for Love. This was a great movie. And the way it handled these people's romance, it wasn't like anything that I've seen before personally. So I know that it must have blown people's minds back in the year 2000. And this movie is really good. I don't really want to give anything away, but visuals and costume design were top notch in this movie. So yeah, go watch In the Mood for Love if you haven't. And then July and August were kind of dead months for me. I only watched 4 movies in July, and I only watched one movie in August. So that's kind of funny. And in July, the first thing I watched was another Kurosawa movie called High and Low. This is a movie that I never really heard about that much. It seems like whenever people mention Kurosawa, they always mention the samurai movies, and they should. Most of his famous movies are samurai movies, like Yojimbo, Seven Samurai, and Ran, and things like that. But High and Low is something that's completely different. It's about a businessman in contemporary Japan. So for this time, it was a modern movie in modern times in 1963. And this, I gotta say, is one of my favorite Kurosawa movies. He's one of those directors where it's almost like everything you watch by him is your favorite. But this is a movie that I really want to rewatch. And again, I don't really want to give anything away, so go watch High and Low if you haven't. And another underrated animated movie. Well, again, I shouldn't say underrated. I mean more like underwatched because this is highly rated by people who watched it, but I don't think enough people watched it. And this is a French movie, but animated by Japanese, I think. I might be wrong though, but it is in French. The language is French. And it's about this guy who's a rock climber. And there's a lot of stuff in here. I really like the animation style. It's pretty more realistic. I couldn't tell if it was rotoscope or not. I should have looked at the behind the scenes stuff by now to see if it was, but it was more on the realistic side. It wasn't really stylized at all much. And I think that there's a place for this kind of animation. Animation is a medium where you can literally do anything as long as you want to put in the time. So I love when there's these highly stylized and extravagant character designs, and the way that the people move isn't really how real people move, because that's also the point of animation, right? You want to use the medium to do things you can't do in live action. But I also like this more realistic style of animation that is seen in Summit of the Gods. It was really good, and everybody should watch it. And here's another one that I don't think people talk about enough, and this is Watership Down from 1978. This is a movie that people might think is for kids because they see the rabbits on the poster, but it is not for kids. This movie might mentally scar a toddler, seriously, but it is also very good, and I am so glad I watched it, and I might watch it again. So yeah, I think a lot of people in the movie world know about Watership Down, but if you haven't seen Watership Down, go watch it. And then the last thing I watched in July was Wolf of Wall Street. This is another one I don't think I have to say much about. Seems like I'm the last person on earth that's seen it, but I really did like it. Even though it's not my favorite Scorsese, but I don't really have any problems with it. So there you go. And then the one thing I watched in August was a really great anime anthology movie called Memories. There's 3 short films, and they are all great, and they are all completely different. I can't say enough how great this collection is. So again, it's called Memories, and one of the shorts in this was directed by the same person who directed Akira. And if you watch it, you'll see because they have a similar style and they also have a similar quality. So again, Memories was really great. And this next thing, see, I'm just watching bangers after bangers. There's not really a lot that I don't like in this section, honestly, because I noticed that I'm really good at finding things that I know I'm interested in. And if I'm interested in it from the beginning, then I'm more likely to like it. That doesn't mean I just like something because it has a spaceship in it, but there's always that first thing that gets you into it. But this next thing that I watched is a 10 out of 10. Samurai Champloo. This is another thing I don't think I have to spend much time on. I don't think I've ever seen somebody say they don't like it, but oh my goodness, this is one of the few things I can say is 10 out of 10. No problems, no flaws. Please. Go watch it. And this next movie is a hilarious comedy and paying homage to the 1970s black exploitation movies, and that is Black Dynamite. Again, I don't think I had to spend any time talking about Black Dynamite. This is another example of if you have seen it, you most likely like it, and if you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. It's better late than never. Look at me. This movie came out 2009, and I just watched it in 2022. So do yourself a favor and go watch this movie. And the next day I watched was, and this is September, by the way. Samurai Champloo and Black Dynamite are September. Because like I said, Memories was the only thing I watched in August. But this next thing I watched was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I have heard a lot about this movie and how the action was very floaty. I mean, the people look like they're literally flying sometimes in this movie. And I think it was really cool. I want to see more movies like this. So I'm definitely going to watch more Hong Kong movies because I like this style. And I wish that Americans would kind of use it a little bit. Because again, I think we get focused on trying to be realistic sometimes. And you don't need to follow the laws of physics all the time as long as you do it right. And I think this is a movie that does it right. So Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, great. And the last thing I watched in September was Whiplash. This is another one I don't think I have to spend a lot of time on. I think this was the breakout performance by Miles Teller, who we see in a lot of things nowadays, and a great performance by the legendary J.K. Simmons. Who doesn't like J.K. Simmons? I mean, come on. Whiplash from 2014 was pretty great. And now October was a pretty big month. I did watch a good amount of stuff in October. And the first thing I watched was Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai. This is starring Forrest Whitaker, who plays a hitman who follows the way of the samurai, I guess, like the title says. But this was a really great movie. I really like Forrest Whitaker's performance. It has great characters, a great a great soundtrack, some pretty good action in there too. And it was just a great movie, and I'm glad I watched it. And this next movie I watched is another Ralph Bakshi, and this one might be my favorite that I've seen so far, and that is American Pop. This is another one that uses rotoscoping, and it shows you the history of American music while also showing you this family through the years. And it was really good, and it's another one that I will probably rewatch. And you can see that Ralph Bakshi is a pretty good director. I need to watch the rest of his stuff. I need to watch Lord of the Rings. I really want to watch Wizards and Heavy Traffic. So I will watch them all eventually. And I know about the Cool World debacle. I'll probably watch that too. But Ralph Bakshi is a really good artist, and I'm glad that he made the movies he made. And this next movie I watched was Leon the Professional, which I'm not really going to get into that much. It is a really good movie, but there is some weird stuff in there that I'm not going to really talk about. And there's even some weird stuff that's not in there that was supposed to be in there, but I'm glad it's not in there. You can look that up for yourself because I'm not going to talk about it, but I watched Leon the Professional. And the next thing I watched was Police Story, the Jackie Chan movie. Jackie Chan is a person that I've always been aware of. I remember watching his cartoon when I was a little kid, but I never really saw a lot of his movies. And when you watch a movie like this, it makes you understand why people like him so much. And of course, I saw Rush Hour as a kid, but I don't really remember those movies that well. But the action in this movie, Police Story, is pretty amazing. The stuff that Jackie Chan does, it just blows my mind. The stuff that he'll do to put his body at risk is just, again, it's just crazy. So yeah, Police Story was really amazing. This is another one. I think everybody who's seen it pretty much likes it. But if you haven't seen it, you need to go watch it. And this next movie is such a gem to me. It really made me like the franchise that it comes from, and that is Street Fighter 2, the animated movie. Street Fighter was always something that I've been aware of too, but I never really played fighting games growing up besides a little bit of Dragon Ball Z here and there. So I never played Street Fighter at all. I've played Mortal Kombat at other people's houses and stuff like that, but I never owned a Mortal Kombat until one of the games was free on PlayStation. But growing up, I never owned a Mortal Kombat, replayed Mortal Kombat, or any other fighting game like that. But when I saw this movie, Street Fighter 2, it made me buy the game Street Fighter 2. It was only like $2 on PlayStation. And I actually tried to play it, and I actually want to get good at it. And I'm going to play Street Fighter 6 because that game looks insane. And I actually downloaded Street Fighter 5 because I got it for free whenever it was free on PlayStation 2. So Street Fighter 2, the animated movie, was really good. It had really good animation, really good fights, and especially for a video game movie, it actually had a pretty good story. This is one of those times that I can say a video game movie was actually good because we all know how that is. Whenever they adapt a video game, it's usually bad. And speaking of video games, I'm going to talk about something that's adapted from a video game a little later. But yeah, Street Fighter 2, the animated movie, really great. And I like it a lot. And this next movie is something I was trying to watch for a little bit of that October theme, and that is Vampire of 1932. This might be the oldest movie that I've watched. It's basically a silent movie. It's one of the first movies with sound, but there's almost no dialogue. There's a little bit, but they're even still using some of the stuff from silent movies, how they would show somebody do something and then put words on the screen to show you what's going on or what they're saying. They did a little bit of that in this movie. But I also think this movie was pretty interesting with how it showed the concept of vampires because now we all have this kind of idea of how vampires are, like with pale skin and some teeth, some sharp canines, and you kill them with a wooden stake in the heart or something like that, and they can't go out in the sun. But this movie doesn't have any of that. It's a really early portrayal of vampires. I think it was pretty cool. And if you're like an insane movie person, like I guess I am, and you're just willing to watch anything, then you should watch this. And this next thing, another thing going along with the October thing, was something that made me restore faith in the MCU, and that is Werewolf by Night. And this is, I think, classified as a TV special. I think it's only an hour long. And Werewolf by Night was pretty good. It was in black and white. It had some good action, and guessing by the title, there's a werewolf in it, so you can imagine what happens in that regard. But I won't speak on it anymore. Just go watch Werewolf by Night if you haven't. It's one of the good Marvel things that dropped in recent years, and everybody should watch it. And I'm excited to see how they continue that storyline in the future. Now, this next anime I watched is something I haven't seen many people talk about, and I'm actually going to read the manga because the show didn't cover the whole story, and this show is so good and the story is so good and interesting that I want to see how it ends. So I'm eventually going to read this manga, and I've never read a manga before. I mean, I've read a little bit of Dragon Ball, but I haven't really read any mangas in my life before. So, and this is Claymore, released in 2007. It is about an all-female group that fights demons in the world. They basically protect people from demons, and it is pretty interesting. There is some, I don't even know how I can put this. I guess I'm going to say beautifully grotesque character designs in this. And if you've seen it or read it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you need to see it because there's some good action in here. I really like the story. And it's a shame that the anime didn't finish the manga, but still, it's worth a watch. It does end at a good place where it wraps everything up that you've seen in the show. So it's definitely worth the watch, and it's short. It's only like 26 episodes, and it's really good. So you know a show is good if it makes you want to read. So there's that. And this next movie I watched is another thing I was doing for Halloween. I was trying to watch like a little horror and I guess Halloween vibe stuff, and that is 1977's House. And it is about a haunted house. That's all I'm going to say about it. And it is probably the most I don't want to say most different, but it was very different than pretty much everything that I've seen in the horror genre. I've never seen another movie like this movie. And I honestly can't even really explain it. You just have to go see it. That's House from 1977. It's Japanese and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, go watch it. And I did talk about Star Wars a little bit before, and this next thing I watched is Star Wars Tales of the Jedi. I did do a whole episode on this anthology show of animated shorts, I guess. I really liked it. It was really good. They've perfected this Clone Wars art style, and I hope we get more Tales of the Jedi. So there's that. And the last thing I watched in October was Cyberpunk Edge Runners. This was a really great anime based on the world of Cyberpunk 2077, the video game. It doesn't really feature any characters from the game, it just takes place in that same world. And it's really good, animated by Studio Trigger. If you know who they are, you know they know how to animate. This was really great visually, written really well. And I don't really want to give anything away, but you have to watch it. And now we're on to November. And the first thing I watched in November was the movie from 1996, Irma Vep. And I gotta say, Maggie Chung is becoming one of my favorite actors. It's a shame she doesn't really act anymore nowadays, but I don't really blame her. I don't think I would want to be famous. So, for people that don't go out in public much, I don't really blame them. But Irma Vep, really dope movie. I really enjoyed it. And I think the director was involved with the recent TV show Irma Vep that was on HBO. So I'm probably gonna watch that too. And then I watched Zen, Grogu, and Dust Bunnies. This like 2 or 3 minute animated short. Not really much to say there. It was animated by Studio Ghibli, so I guess we got a Star Wars Studio Ghibli thing, which is pretty interesting. But it was cool, I guess. It was only like 3 minutes, so it wasn't really much to say about it. But the next thing I watched was Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Another good MCU thing. I think Black Panther 1 was pretty good, flawed but pretty good. And then with the passing of Chadwick Boseman, I was kind of nervous about what would happen in the movie if they would do it right, and I think they did it right. I don't really have any complaints with Wakanda Forever. It's one of the better Marvel things to come out. Ryan Coogler did a great job. So yeah, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, good movie. And this next thing I watched was a pretty interesting short film from 1945, directed by Karel Zaman and Borivar Saman. And Karel Zaman is a filmmaker that I've been aware of for a little bit, but I haven't been able to watch any of his movies. And he's known for doing a lot of camera tricks and having animation mixed in with live action. And that's what he does here in this short, A Christmas Dream. He has like things like stuffed animals and things like that in stop motion, and there's a little girl, like a real live little girl acting in it in the same shot, which is pretty cool. And this is from 1945, so it's pretty old, but it's also watchable. A lot of really old stuff from this time isn't really that watchable, but this is only 11 minutes and it's just really good. I liked it a lot. That's A Christmas Dream from 1945. And the last thing I watched in November was the original Mad Max. I gotta say, I was kind of disappointed in this movie. Now, I kind of see how it was legendary from being in 1979, but I don't know, man. I think Fury Road ruined me because that movie just had so much going on. that there was no way that this could live up to it. I mean, it did have some pretty cool action and some pretty cool crashes and things like that. So I don't know. I just think my perception may have been flawed. If I would have seen this in 1979, I probably would have been raving about it too. And then in December, last month of 2022, I did watch a few things, but I watched mostly a bunch of short films, honestly. Well, I watched three feature length films and three short films. So the first thing I watched in December was The Northman. This is a movie that had been out for a while. I didn't see it in theaters, but it was finally on streaming, so I watched The Northman. I think it was really good. I think it's based off a Shakespeare play, if I remember correctly. But again, good acting. I liked it visually. There was some good action in there, and it had a good story. I mean, Shakespeare plays usually have good stories, so if it's based on that, it should be good, right? And yeah, I really liked The Northman. And the next thing I watched was Paperman from 2012. This is a Disney short film, and I actually watched this and the next thing that I watched right after each other. So I watched Paperman, and then I watched Treasure Planet. So I did like a Disney thing, watching a short film, and then the feature length film. Well, I guess a Pixar thing. They always have the short films when you go see the movies in the theater. So I watched Paperman, which is like a really great short. I really like the Disney and Pixar shorts, especially because it seems like that's where all the creativity goes recently. I kind of get tired of that 3D style, especially from Pixar because they all kind of look the same. Like I don't have a problem with 3D, but you can still make things look different from each other. All your movies should look the same, and all their short films look totally different, and they're all pretty great. So I enjoy the short films more nowadays. And Paperman was that. Paperman was really good. And Treasure Planet was one of the last 2D movies from Disney, and I wish they would go back to doing 2D because that's when I think Disney was at their best was when they were doing 2D. Like I said, I don't have anything against 3D, but I just don't think they really do as much as they could with them visually. While they may have the good stories and the good songs and things like that, I just don't think that they're as great as they should be visually. Because while I do think it's cool that I can see every little stitch on a character's shirt, I just think that there's more you can do. Like just having something highly detailed doesn't really make it good to me. Like I said, I mentioned Batman Mask of the Phantasm before, and that movie looks just as good as anything, and it's a 2D movie from the 90s. So there's really no excuse. But Treasure Planet was really good. I don't remember watching that movie as a kid. I might have seen it when I was really young. It did come out in 2002, but Treasure Planet was really good. Treasure Planet is one that seems to have kind of fallen off. What I mean by that is nobody really talks about it. A lot of people, of course, they still talk about Lion King and Mulan and Cinderella and things like that, but I think Treasure Planet should be up there with the greats. I really like Treasure Planet. But the next thing I watched is this outer space movie called Gravity, starring Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. I don't really have a lot to say about it. It was a solid space movie. It had good effects, good visuals. Those were really the only two people in the movie. There was a few voices, but Sandra Bullock and George Clooney were the only ones that you see on camera, I think. And yeah, Gravity was pretty good. And the last two things that I saw in 2022 were short films, and one of them is Scavengers from 2016. And the reason why I watched this is because there is a show coming out this year called Scavengers Reign, which is based on this short that was originally aired on Adult Swim. And I am so excited about this show, Scavengers Reign. This looks like it's going to be the show that I've wanted, that I didn't even know that I wanted and needed, but it looks like it's going to be exactly what I've been looking for in a sci-fi show. And you can go see this short on YouTube. It's called Scavengers 2016, animated beautifully, and I just can't wait for this show. And the last thing I watched in 2022 is a Russian short film called Amba, AMBA, and I think it's on YouTube too, but it might be kind of hard to find. You might have to not click on the first thing you see to get in the best quality because I did watch it in really high quality. And this is an 18-minute short film, another sci-fi space thing. I don't really want to talk about it to give it away, but if you're someone like me who likes to find obscure things to watch, find things that not everybody is talking about to watch, go watch this. And that's Amba, AMBA. I did post it on Instagram and Twitter, like a little clip from it. So you can find that. And if you like what you see there, then watch the whole show. It's only 18 minutes long, but there isn't a dull moment. And it's animated beautifully. And that was everything I watched in 2022, at least in movies. I'm going to go through the shows now.
Now, 2022 was a pretty good year of TV shows for me. I started a bunch of shows, but I didn't really finish. So I'm just gonna go through the ones that I did finish. There's a bunch of stuff that I should finish. Well, Arcane season one was pretty amazing. That came out 2021, but I didn't watch it till a few months later, and it was 2022. So Arcane is one of my favorite things that I watched recently. It has a 3D art style, but it mixes a little bit of 2D stuff drawn on there, kind of like a Spider Verse, but done differently. Arcane is insane. I did a whole episode about it already, so I don't really have to speak on that. But if you haven't seen Arcane, you need to go watch it. I watched season one of Ted Lasso. What can I say? That show is hilarious. It's a hilarious show, and I know season two is out, but I'll get to it eventually. And I mentioned the book of Boba Fett before. It was okay, I guess. I don't really want to sit here and talk about the book of Boba Fett. I think we did a whole episode about that before. I mentioned FLCL before. I don't have to mention that again. Now, a banger in 2022 was Peacemaker. And again, this is something that I wasn't really anticipating at all. I was wondering why they were even making a Peacemaker show, and I was wondering how is this going to be good at all. And they proved me wrong. I will say that because Peacemaker is insane. I think we talked about that on here before too, so I won't talk about Peacemaker anymore. But Peacemaker is definitely one of the best superhero shows. And then I watched Euphoria season two. I had seen season one back when it first came out, and season two came out last year. Euphoria was one of the most popular shows last year, so I don't think I really have to talk about Euphoria much. But season two was kind of a little bit down for me. I think it was still good, but it wasn't like season one. So I don't really know if I'm gonna watch season three or not. Maybe if I have some free time, I will, but most likely not because I'll just watch a different show instead. And I mentioned Jujutsu Kaisen already. Great show. I watched season one of Mr. Robot, which is about a vigilante hacker. Great show, full of great acting, great writing. It's gritty. It's something that's right up my alley. And I can't wait to watch season two of Mr. Robot. And after that, I watched 2011's Thundercats. Now, Thundercats is a show that I was kind of aware of. I hadn't really seen the 1980s version, but then recently I did see a little bit of it. And if I was a kid at that time, I would have been a huge fan. So you could say I'm a fan of the Thundercats. And the 2011 show is to me the perfect way to pay homage to an old thing, but also do something that's new and fresh and it doesn't disrespect the original material. Like if you watch the 1980s version, then watch 2011, Lion-O is still Lion-O, Tigra is Tigra, and so on and so forth. I think the biggest change when it comes to character traits is Snarf, but I didn't really have a problem with it because I'm going to be honest, Snarf was kind of weird to me in the 1980s because they kind of treat him like a pet, but he talks. So it's like, okay, if he's going to be talking and have the same intelligence as everybody else, why are they kind of treating him like a pet? So I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of just a product of how old shows were. I don't think people really thought about things like that when they were making those kind of shows back then. So whatever. But I really like this Thundercats 2011, and I think everybody should watch it. I think it's one of those shows that was canceled too soon. They were planning to do 52 episodes. They got 26, so that's pretty sad to me. and I really wish I could see this story finished. This is one of those things where it's like, man, if I was a billionaire, the dumb thing that I would do would be to fund a TV show for my own entertainment. You know, I guess a lot of billionaires and rich people do dumb stuff with their money. Well, that would be my dumb thing. If I just had a boatload of money, I would call up the guy who was in charge of this show and say, "What are you doing? Are you free? Because I want you to get the gang back together and finish this old show. However much money you need, you can have it." And I would pay him and I would have him do it. And it wouldn't be about the money that it would make in the back end. It would just be about me wanting to see this thing get finished. So, yeah, Thundercats 2011 is something that I really enjoyed and I wish more people would see. And in April of last year, I finally finished Batman: The Brave and the Bold. This is a show that I started way back in like 2017, before I was really watching movies, before I was even thinking about doing a podcast, years before I was thinking about doing a podcast. And I had started getting into all the superhero stuff that I had missed growing up. And Batman: The Brave and the Bold is a pretty amazing show. I think I didn't watch it at the time because I didn't like the direction that they took Batman. I always liked the dark, gritty version, but this version is just as good. I really liked how every episode pretty much had a team up with a different character, and I like how this show put the spotlight on the more obscure DC characters. You know, you're seeing a lot of episodes with people like Blue Beetle and things like that. Like, I don't even think Superman and Wonder Woman even appeared till the last season. So that was pretty cool. You know, you see people like the Metal Men in this show, and and I like what this show did with Aquaman. This show has one of the best portrayals of Aquaman. So yeah, Batman: The Brave and the Bold. This is another one. If you know it, you most likely love it. And if you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. I mentioned Moon Knight, and Megalobox already, and Maya and the Three, and I watched Atlanta season 3 last year, and I need to watch season 4. I should have watched it when it came out, but I was busy watching a bunch of other stuff. Atlanta is one of my favorite shows. I'll probably do a full episode on the whole show when I finish it, and I'll probably rewatch it so everything is fresh in my head. Atlanta is just so amazing, and season 3 was more of that, and I'm excited to see season 4. So again, if you haven't seen Atlanta, you need to go watch it. Donald Glover is amazing. Zazie Beetz is amazing. Lakeith Stanfield is amazing, and what's his face that plays Paperboy is so amazing, and he's in a bunch of stuff now, so I should know his name. I'm sorry I don't know your name, man, but you're amazing too. I mentioned Diabolical already, and in June I finally finished Ozark. This is a show that I had been watching since the beginning. Maybe season 2 was out when I started watching it, but I remember waiting for season 3 and then of course waiting for season 4, and it ended last year, and it was a wild ride. And I still don't really know how I feel about the ending, but it is a really great show. Jason Bateman is forever a legend for this. So, yeah, go watch Ozark. I mentioned Serial Experiments Lane already. It's another thing everybody should go watch. And last year was Young Justice season 4, I think. And it's a shame because Young Justice might not come back for season 5. I think it's pretty unlikely. And this is one of my favorite superhero shows, man. I think it's such a good portrayal of the DC universe and how all these characters coexist with each other. I wish Marvel would do a similar kind of show like this where we just have a whole bunch of different characters that may pop up, and yes, it focuses on a select group of people, but we know that this is a world full of heroes, and I really love Young Justice for that. And we see there's a group of characters that we meet as really young teenagers grow up into being adult heroes, and we even see newer young heroes come up from behind them. And it's just a show that I really enjoy, and I hope that it gets a proper ending. And I mentioned Obi-Wan Kenobi already. And in July, I watched The Boys season 3. We did a full episode on this season, so I don't really have to say much, but The Boys is pretty wild, pretty diabolical. And if you haven't seen The Boys, you got to get on that. And I'm really excited for season 4. I can't wait. Yeah, The Boys is definitely one of my favorite superhero shows too. And I've been trying to watch more comedy recently, so I try to watch, something serious and then something funny. And I watched Blue Mountain State, which is a show that I've heard about. I remember seeing it on TV, like when I'm looking through the guide when it was running, and it is about a college football player and about the things that go on at a college. Of course, it's super dramatized and exaggerated, but it's really funny. And I never watched it all these years because I just always I'm always skeptical about shows and movies about football because I don't know if I mentioned before, but I'm a huge football fan. So whenever I see a movie about football or a show, I'm always worried about how they're going to portray it. But this show is really funny and I enjoyed it a lot. If you haven't seen Blue Mountain State, that is definitely something you should watch. And then to finish off July, I finally fully watched Spectacular Spider-Man. This is the show that I've heard about a lot in recent years. I didn't watch it when it came out. I don't know what I was doing in 2008, but better late than never, like I said. And this show might be the best portrayal of Spider-Man outside the comics. It is really good. This is another one that didn't get a proper ending. It got canceled too soon, but that makes it very short and sweet. And you can finish, I think, 26 episodes really quick, 26 half an hour episodes. The show is so amazing. I really love the portrayal of Tombstone, and I just can't say enough about how good this show is. If you like Spider Man, you haven't seen this show, what are you doing? You need to watch it. And then August had the hidden gem that became a mainstream hit called The Bear. This show just came out of nowhere. I'm probably going to do a full episode on this show too, especially with season 2 coming out. Wow, this show is so amazing. I think I binge watched it because it's very short. I think it's only 8 half-an-hour episodes, but it's just so amazing. If you don't know what it is, it's about a chef in Chicago who basically went to the Harvard of chef schools in New York, and then he went back home to Chicago to resurrect his failing family restaurant. It's really good, and everybody who I've seen says that it portrays working in a kitchen pretty well. I just really love this show. I want to rewatch it. It's just so amazing. I can't say enough about The Bear. I mentioned Samurai Champloo already, and in September I watched season 1 of X-Men Evolution. This is another show that I didn't really watch growing up. I remember the 90s X-Men. I mean, I watched a little bit of X-Men Evolution, but I don't really remember it. So it is what it is. And this is another really good cartoon. I wish more people talked about it now, especially with the X-Men joining the MCU soon. Maybe people will watch the show, and since they're doing a little reboot or they're doing another season of the X-Men 90s show, maybe people will watch X-Men Evolution too. And there's another show that I can't wait to finish. I really liked how they portrayed all the characters. I like the art style. The X-Men is just such an interesting part of Marvel, and X-Men Evolution shows that. And then this show right here to finish off September was a banger, and that is Succession. One of the most popular shows out right now. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's on HBO. Succession is insane. I can't wait to watch season 2, 3, or 4, however many seasons this show runs for. It's really good. And again, go watch it. I mentioned Claymore already. I mentioned every show that I watched in October already. Claymore, Tales of the Jedi, and Cyberpunk Edge Runners. And in November was when I finished Andor, which I talked about enough. Probably the best Star Wars show. So again, watch it if you haven't. And to finish off November, I watched season 1 of 1997's Spawn. Spawn is a character that I've been aware of basically my whole life. There's a live action movie starring Michael Jai White in the 90s, And I think Spawn is a really cool character. He's super underrated, and I think he doesn't get enough attention because he's not part of Marvel or DC. So naturally, people from other comics don't really get as much attention. But this cartoon is gritty, it's dark, it's violent, and I think it has a very powerful story too. So yeah, I watched season 1 and 2 so far. I just finished season 2 like a few days ago, so it wasn't 2022, but I'm gonna finish season 3 in the next few days. So Spawn is a really great show. If you have HBO Max, go watch it right now. And then the last show that I watched in 2022 was House of the Dragon. I was a pretty big fan of Game of Thrones, even though the ending left a sour taste in my mouth. So I was kind of iffy about House of the Dragon, but everybody told me it was good, so I watched it and I really enjoyed it. And I'm not going to say much about House of the Dragon because I'm going to do a full episode on it. Probably the next episode of this podcast is going to be talking about season 1 of House of the Dragon. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Besides, I liked it. And that's all the stuff I watched in 2022, movies and TV shows. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I'm anticipating for 2023, which not much really. The new Puss in Boots movie just came out, and since everybody's raving about it, and I've seen a few clips, and the animation does look gorgeous, so I'm probably gonna watch that. I did not see the original 2011 Puss in Boots, so I was kind of iffy, and I'm just like, well, I wasn't into Puss in Boots, so I don't know if I'm gonna go see a sequel, but it looks really good. So I'm gonna watch it, and I need to go watch all the Shrek movies too because I haven't seen any of those. I just wasn't really into Shrek growing up, so I will watch all the Shrek movies, and Puss in Boots is something that I will watch in 2023. And I think my most anticipated movie is probably Spider-Verse 2. It just looks insane, and we know how crazy Spider-Verse 1 was, and Spider-Verse 2 looks like it even took it to a different level. So I really want to see Spider Verse 2. So other than that, I don't really think there's any Marvel or DC thing that I'm anticipating for 2023 because we don't really know what's up with DC. I think Blue Beetle is coming out. I don't know if that's coming out in 2023 or 2024. I think it's coming out in 2023, so I will be seeing that. I think episodes of Doom Patrol are currently running and coming out every week on HBO Max, and I did see most of season 1. I need to finish season 1 first and foremost, and then catch up to the recent episodes because Doom Patrol is really good. It's a super weird show, but it is really amazing. And even though I haven't even seen all the first season, I think it's one of the best superhero shows out. So yeah, I guess you could put Doom Patrol in there. Whatever DC is doing in the animated stuff, because I do need to catch up and I do want to see what they announce next. Maybe another Superman movie, another Batman movie, Justice League movie, who knows? Because it should be about time for the heroes to start meeting each other and things like that. We've already seen Superman meet the Flash, and we see in the Green Lantern movie that he knows Green Arrow and things like that. So we'll see. But I also want to see what's up with that Batman and the Cape Crusader show that Bruce Timm was supposed to be doing, and with all the budget cuts, HBO Max isn't doing it anymore. So now they're shopping it around to other places. So I really hope that comes out. And I guess we'll stick with superheroes for a second. And we did finally get an update on Invincible season 2, and that's supposed to be coming out late 2023. We'll see if it actually does. It'll probably get delayed till 2024, but I hope Invincible season 2 comes out this year because that was another one of my favorite shows of recent years. I watched every single episode as it came out, and I can't say enough about how good that show is. So yeah, I talked about The Bear, so I'm really excited about The Bear season 2. Currently, The Last of Us is running on HBO, and I'm probably going to watch that eventually. I don't know when, but I did play the video game pretty recently, so all that's still fresh in my head. So I'm not really rushing to see the show, But the show does look really good, and everybody who's watching it seems to be enjoying it. So that's good. And we know HBO doesn't really miss, so that's all cool. And I talked about Vinland Saga a little bit before. That is currently running, so I'm watching every single episode. Every Monday on Netflix, they put that episode out, and I'm watching it before the day is done. And that's it. So Vinland Saga is another one. I probably will do a full episode on Vinland Saga because that show is just amazing. And I talked about Star Wars a lot. You know I'm a Star Wars fan. Same thing. The Bad Batch season 2 is currently running. So every Wednesday, I'm watching the Bad Batch season 2, and I'll probably talk about that. So that's another thing. And I talked a lot about anime. I may have mentioned Initial D, and in 2023, MF Ghost is coming out, which is based on the manga that is the second manga from the same writer as Initial D, which is, I guess, like a sequel. I don't know if there's characters that appear in MF Ghost. I don't really know much about it. I just know that it's about a guy that's trying to become a pro rally driver. So it could be a spiritual successor or actually be connected in the story with Initial D, but I liked Initial D. I'm almost finished with Initial D. I'm on the fifth stage. I think there's just the fifth stage and then final stage, and that's it. So I'm really excited for MF Ghost. I think it'll be a nice different take on the racing thing. I don't know if they'll even do any street racing because this is about somebody trying to become a professional racer. So I think it'll be cool to see somebody try to navigate the professional world instead of the street racing world. So yeah, I'm ready to see MF Ghost. I can't really say that I'm anticipating Ant-Man 3. I'll probably watch it. I don't know if I'll watch it in theaters. I'll probably watch it on Disney Plus, but again, I talked about how I feel towards the MCU enough, but I just don't really care to see it that much. There's not really any hype for me anymore. But there's probably a bunch of other stuff that I'm missing. I know House of the Dragon season 2 isn't coming out till 2024. I talked about The Bear. I don't know when Succession's next season is coming out because I haven't been paying attention since I've only watched season 1. So I don't know about that. We know that Arcane season 2 is coming. I just don't think it's coming this year. We haven't really heard anything. The Star Wars Acolyte, I don't know when that is supposed to drop, but I know when Mandalorian season 3 is supposed to drop, and that's pretty soon. So I'm gonna be watching that, and we know that they're going back to Mandalore. So I'm curious to see what's going on with that. And that Moon Girl and the Devil Dinosaur is supposed to come out pretty soon. I think in February. And this is a Marvel thing that I actually really want to see because the art style just looks gorgeous. So this is the type of stuff that I want to see from Marvel. Push boundaries and do something different. There's probably a lot of stuff that I'm missing for 2023 because I'm thinking of things that are not out yet, but I don't know if they're coming out in 2023 per se. We know the Ahsoka show is coming soon, so I'm excited about that. So that's really it. 2022 was a year of watching a lot of great stuff. I didn't really watch a lot of things that I don't like, and I think that's good. I never want to watch something and not like it or come away from it feeling like it was a waste of time. So that's always good. But sometimes you have to watch things you don't like or watch a bad movie because sometimes to figure out what you do like, you have to see something that you don't like. And sometimes it happens. Sometimes you get caught by surprise. Like FLCL caught me by surprise. But sometimes it happens. So in the next few episodes, I think I'm going to talk about House of the Dragon, and then I think I'm going to watch Black Adam. So we'll see. Because, like I said, I've been kind of behind on DC. I know that's not animated, but I did miss that movie. So I'll probably watch it. And again, that was a movie I wasn't really interested in seeing from the beginning, so I didn't feel the need to go to the theater. But it is on HBO Max, so I'll probably watch it soon after I do the episode about House of the Dragon. So that was it. But I watched a lot of stuff in 2022. So this was fun, and I'll see you next time.